issue. So I want to try to walk through this fairly quickly, if you'll bear with me. We'll have a lot of time later for Q&A, so maybe from this session onward, save some Q's for later, and I'll try to have some A's. Also, expect me to give you a bit of an update on things that are happening at Concordia Portland, and feel free to engage with me on those things later as well. But the spiritual problem, I think, is maybe something that hits home a little more closely to us, because this is the realm in which we work in terms of shaping people formationally. So I want to just remind us this issue here. What are we trying to do with our devices? We said boredom was a pretty significant thing that all of us are trying to address here. And I just want to run with that, borrowing again from some of this talk about therapeutic culture that I've had going on for the last day or so. So in our modern age, I think we make an idol out of the idea of happiness. And so going back to Philip Rieff and his very important work, The Triumph of Therapeutic Culture, he argued there that the highest good of Western culture is personal well-being, self-fulfillment, and happiness. This is kind of our ultimate. It is God, in a way, for many of us. Whether we would acknowledge that in the Christian church or not is a different issue. But in terms of satisfying our sinful self, I think we can see ourselves fitting into the picture that Rieff tries to paint. He argues that happiness and personal well-being are achieved most often through entertainment. Now, if there's a highest good, we've got to ask, well, what is the greatest evil? And if entertainment is one of the ways of achieving the highest good, well, then preventing someone from achieving that highest good might be the greatest evil. But in other words, you know, what constitutes lack of entertainment, or what situation does lack of entertainment produce but boredom? So Rieff was writing in the 60s, as I mentioned yesterday, similar to some of the others that I've highlighted over the last 2 days. I think, honestly, his work was prophetic because it seems to me far more descriptive in the here and now than when he was writing in the 60s. It was paid a decent amount of attention at the time, but it's received substantially more in the last 20 or 30 years than 50 years ago. So boredom as a problem is something that Rieff raises. In a way, it's the greatest evil. But boredom hasn't been a problem for really all that long in Western culture. So there's a good-looking fellow there, Arthur Schopenhauer. He's a German philosopher from the early 1800s. I don't know how it is that all philosophers get to be so good-looking. But somehow, man. Anyhow, if you've ever seen Kierkegaard, he's, wow. So, writing in the New York Times a couple of years back, Susan Sontag, who has some connections to Rieff, is reflecting on Schopenhauer, and she writes, Schopenhauer ranks boredom with pain, a kind of pathology, ranks boredom with pain as one of the twin evils of life. It's pain for the have-nots, boredom for the haves. And so really what distinguishes it is a question of affluence. Boredom is relatively new historically. The first time the term was used was in 1768. But for us, boredom is not a new problem. I was telling you about my experience waiting in the bank line when I was young with my parents and making trouble, and they had nothing really to distract me. And I was talking about that in relation to, you know, parents handing their devices to kids at the dinner table in a public space. This is a way for the kids to avoid boredom, but also to distract them from being troublesome. My parents had nothing like that. I had to learn how to be bored. And I suspect all of us have some idea of what that was like, or at least some memory. But now all of us have the opportunity to never be bored, because I can perpetually be entertaining myself on this. So avoiding boredom, I think, is for us almost a medicalized issue. Boredom has become a pathology, a problem, a kind of pain that Schopenhauer talks about. And in a medical framework, it's a problem in need of a cure. It isn't just a disease, it's a dis-ease. And so devices promise that we'll never have to be bored or feel alone. So every time we feel boredom or aloneness creeping in, we check. And some of the latest stats, I know this is small, forgive me for squeezing so much data on here sometimes. The latest stats are we're all at about 35 to 85 checks per day, right? And the difference really is usually based on age according to the demographics. And at 30 seconds each, right, if we're doing 85 of these, we're up to 5 hours per day, just checking, right? And so that seems shocking, right? And it should. And again, like my engagement with Tom and his daughter and all of this data, none of this is homogeneous, right? It doesn't apply to all of us equally, directly. We're all somewhere on a continuum, and probably some of us don't fit any of this at all. So don't apply this to everybody, but keep in mind these are some of the reported stats that are out there in terms of sociologists doing quantitative surveys. We also have this interesting phenomenon of concurrent device use. So we're now bored using just one. We need more than one. So how many of you watch TV and flip through your phone at the same time? Okay, good, right? Or play a game on your iPad, during the commercials, or perhaps you're reading your Kindle and you're watching TV and you've got your phone, right? Now, I don't know how somebody can do this, but some of the statistics that I'm drawing on say there are those of us who are using up to 5 at a time. I'm too easily distracted by the squirrel. So 5 at a time? Yeah, I don't get it, but there it is. That's the data that's out there for us to think about and wrestle with. An author that I really appreciate his work. He's really quite difficult to read. His essays are better. He's kind of considered a postmodern literature author. But perhaps you've heard of David Foster Wallace. He says this in describing the way we use technology: we can rest while undergoing stimulation. We can receive without giving. So for a long time we've been doing this with television, right? But now we can do it with a handful of different devices at the same time. So avoiding boredom becomes indicative of the triumph of therapeutic culture. It's winning. Entertainment we're captive to almost the need for entertainment and the need to avoid boredom if you generalize this data out. We can talk about religion being used in this way, and that was some of what I mentioned yesterday. But devices are serving this same purpose, right? We're asking, what can it do for me? What problem can it solve? And this is one of them. So I want to spiritualize this and go just a little bit deeper and say our spiritual problem is metaphysical boredom. So I want to get at it this way. Quoting David Foster Wallace again from his book, The Pale King, he says, maybe dullness is associated with psychic pain because something that's dull or opaque fails to provide enough stimulation to distract people from some other deeper type of pain that is always there, if only in an ambient, low-level way, in which most of us spend nearly all our time and energy to distract ourselves from feeling, or at least from feeling directly or with our full attention. Surely something must lie behind not just muzak or dull, tedious places anymore, but now also actual TV in waiting rooms, supermarket checkouts, airports gates, SUVs back seats, Walkman, iPods, Blackberry, cell phones that attach to your head. This terror of silence with nothing diverting to do. I can't think anyone really believes that today's so-called information society is just about information. Everyone knows it's about something else way down. So another way to talk about this metaphysical boredom, I would argue, is disgust with what is and the limits it presents. It's kind of existential. But in a more short way of saying it is hating our being. Christians have long thought about this for probably 1,600 or more years since the Desert Fathers went out and came up with their list of the 7 deadly sins. They called it Acadia, excuse me, and the modern translation for this is sloth or idleness. but it does not mean laziness. Sloth or idleness is often so much more work and busyness and distraction, but it functions as an avoidance mechanism of what God has really called us to do or made us for. And that's the hating our being bit. We're not satisfied with it, or we want to avoid fulfilling the call or the demand. So just an example that I know that we can relate to as pastors or pastors' family members. I'm sure a handful of you know a brother or two who didn't go to seminary straight out of college when he knew he should have, but worked an entire career, 20, 30 years, supported a family, put some kids through college, and went back to seminary and finally answered that call, but regrets missing out on those 30 years prior. I've got about 3 or 4 people in my life. One of them was a drum instructor. He's an ELCA church member. He never went back to seminary. He still has not gone back. He works in the financial world. But when I bumped into him maybe 10 years after I graduated from high school, and he knew what I was studying for, he just expressed very freely the regret that he didn't answer that call that he felt when he was young. And that's just a big sort of example of what it might mean to hate our being or avoid what God is calling us to. So I want to try to put David Foster Wallace, these ideas together with a contemporary comedian. But just for the sake of nobody being offended, I'll say a couple of things. So I'm going to show you a clip from Louis C.K. And Louis C.K. is one of the men, after the Me Too movement kicked off, who was accused by female comedians of being sexually inappropriate with them and getting away with it as a man. Like many of the men who've been accused in this movement, our contemporary culture treats them as the new irredeemables. And it's almost as if they are banned from our existence. And anything that they've ever said or done that may have been of value ought to be tossed into the trash can as well. We're Christians. We believe no one is irredeemable. And I also think it's a category mistake to throw off the good work of people who have made human sinful errors, however egregious they might be. So it's fairly well known that Martin Luther King Jr. Worked the civil rights movement on the basis of very deeply Christian theological commitments. It's also fairly well known by his best friend, who was his biographer after he was assassinated, that he was a serial adulterer. We don't reject his work. We actually have a national holiday honoring him. So I think we ought to try to practice a little bit more consistently. And the other bit that I want to say about Louis C.K. is he's going to say and do 2 crass things in this video. He's going to make a hand gesture that you will all know exactly what it means. And so forgive me, and especially forgive ladies in the room, forgive me. I think what he has to say is important enough to hear him if we can try to ignore that. And he uses a swear word, okay, but not a really great one. And again, it's kind of misogynistic. If you don't want me to show it, tell me. I've tried to warm you up to this so that you know that it's coming. I don't want to deeply offend you or you know, anyhow. Any objections?
Is this a trigger warning then?
In a way, yeah. Yeah, in a way. I don't think you'll be traumatized, but, you know. We're all adults, but you never know. Let me get out of this.
parents really struggle with, like, all the other kids have the terrible things, so my kid has to. Yeah, let your kid go and be a better example to the kids. She doesn't, just because the other stupid kids have phones, doesn't mean that, okay, well, my kid has to be stupid, otherwise she'll feel weird.
Right.
You know, I think these things are toxic. Especially for kids. It's just this thing. It's bad, and they don't look at people when they talk to them, and they don't build empathy. You know, kids are mean, and it's because they're trying it out. They look at a kid and they go, "You're fat," and then they see the kid's face scrunch up, and they go, "Ooh, that doesn't feel good to make a person do that." Right. But they got to start with doing the mean thing. But when they write "you're fat," then they just go, that was fun. I like that.
That tasted good.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, you need to build an ability to just be yourself and not be doing something. That's what the phones are taking away.
Yes.
Is the ability to just sit there, like this. That's being a person, right?
Yes.
No one can, you gotta check. Because, you know, underneath everything in your life, there's that thing, that empty, forever empty. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes,
Just acknowledge that it's all for nothing and you're alone. You know, it's down there. And sometimes when things clear away, you're not watching it, you're in your car, and you start going, oh no, here it comes, that I'm alone, like it starts to visit on you. You know, just the sadness.
Yes.
Life is tremendously sad just by, being in it. And so you're driving, and then you go, that's why we text and drive. I look around, pretty much 100% of people driving are texting.
Yes.
And they're killing, everybody's murdering each other with their cars.
Yes.
But people are willing to risk taking a life and ruining their own because they don't want to be alone for a second. Because it's so hard. I was in my car one time, and a Bruce Springsteen song comes on. And it made me really sense, like Jungle, what's the Jungle song?
Jungleland.
This one where he goes, and he sounds far away. And I'm like,
that's half of them.
Yeah.
No, he goes,
and it's really far away sounding. Can you do it with the reverb? Can you do it? No, they're not doing it.
They're not doing it. So.
Except for it was Springsteen. If it was you doing that, I would have been like, what the hell is that in my radio?
I did it just the same,
yes.
Bruce.
And I heard it, and it gave me kind of like a fall back to school depression feeling. It made me really sad.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, I'm getting sad. Gotta get the phone and write hi to like 50 people. And then, somebody cool writes back, and then somebody not as cool writes after, and I'm like, fuck you, learn it. But,
hey, how come you didn't answer my text?
So, anyway, I started to get that sad feeling, and I was reaching for the phone, and I said, you know what, don't. Just be sad. Just let the sadness stand in the way of it, and let it hit you like a truck. And I let it come, and Bruce, and I just started to feel, oh my God. And I pulled over, and I just cried like a bitch. I cried so much, and it was beautiful. It was like this beautiful, it's just this, the sadness is poetic. You're lucky to live sad moments. And then I had happy feelings, because when you let yourself feel sad,
yes,
your body has like antibodies. It has happiness that comes
rushing in
to meet the sadness. So I was grateful to feel sad, and then I met it with true, profound happiness. It was such a trip, and the thing is, because we don't want that first bit of sad, we push it away with like a little phone for the food, and you get a little kind of. You never feel completely sad or completely happy. You just feel kind of satisfied with your product.
Yes.
And then you die. So that's why I want to get a phone for my kids. That's what I'm
All right, so that's a little bit of the marriage of these ideas. he was naming metaphysical boredom, right? The sense that we're somehow dissatisfied with our lives, and in order to avoid that bad feeling, we do almost everything we can to treat the pathology of boredom. I think there's an additional problem that we can tack onto this. So I suspect most of you are familiar with C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia. Yes, so we know about the wardrobe. How many Doctor Who fans are in the room? All right, okay, a few of you. So you know about this object called the TARDIS in Doctor Who. I've never watched the show, but I know just enough about the object that it works for my analogy. So look at both of these objects, right? On the outside, they are a finite dimensions, right? Height, width, length, depth. But on the inside, what are the dimensions?
Bigger on the inside.
How much bigger? Yeah. All right. So I want to use this analogy to talk about human beings. I think human beings, all of us in the room, can recognize each other. On the outside, we're finite. We have distinguishable dimensions, features, characteristics, and so on. But I also think on the inside, we're very much like the wardrobe. The dimensions are infinite. And while the Oracle of Delphi says, know thyself, I think we as Christians recognize very well that probably we can never fully do that, much less people with whom we're in intimate relationships. But it's that inside, that depth of our being, I think, that we want to have known by others in an intimate way. But getting there requires taking a risk, vulnerability, exposing oneself, right? We all know how uncomfortable it would be to be physically naked and have someone who isn't allowed to see us or shouldn't be seeing us see us in that moment, right? The gaze of the other, just in that moment we're captive, and that's powerful. But what about when people know our deepest, darkest secrets, our worst fears, our greatest doubts? That's the inside. That's a different kind of exposure, a different kind of power, a different kind of gaze. And we are, in those moments of intimacy, in the grip of another. We are captive to them. And it produces this situation. Now that you know this, do you still love me? Will you still accept me? Am I still welcome here? How are you going to respond? That's our fear. That's the big risk. So we try to work to present ourselves in ways that guarantee people will like us. So from David Foster Wallace again, in order to deal with this very human issue, he says the more we watch TV, Netflix, YouTube, the more we participate in social media networks, Wallace says, we receive unconscious reinforcement of the deep thesis that the most significant quality of truly alive persons is watchableness, and that genuine human worth is not just identical with, but rooted in the phenomenon of watching. Watching and watchability become the measure of value and significance. So we project ourselves as a means of protecting ourselves. So I'm going to, on my social media profile, let's talk about Facebook, right? I'm going to walk into a museum, and I'm going to have my friend John with me. And John and I are going to work out this little photo shoot in the museum. So I'm going to sit down in front of a well-known piece of art, and I'm going to take a contemplative pose. And John's going to come up at just the right angle with just the right lighting, and he's going to take a picture. And then I'm going to take that picture home, and I'm going to upload it onto my computer, and then I'm going to push it out as my Facebook profile. Because I want you to believe that I'm fairly highbrow, erudite and I appreciate the right things in life. And I'm projecting an idealized but utterly false image, right? Because it's all about what you think of me via the encounter you have on social media. And so this is what we do. Facebook profile, Instagram feed, your snaps, if you all do them. My students do. But from Foster Wallace again, he says, TVs and devices propose an unrealistic measure for real life. That is, that real life should be full of the kind of always bright, funny, supernaturally beautiful people and captivating, glamorous, can't-miss-it events that are self-engineered for digital reality and to be shared. The trouble with our social media profile and working through that to get people to like me, I think, is this for us as we try to address our people according to the spiritual issue of that's maybe driving loneliness in our culture. That is, if I get enough likes for that particular profile picture that I had John help me take, I get the sense that my life is interesting enough, it's watchable enough, it's worthy enough. And if enough people, I don't know what the right number is, respond affirmatively, then I can use that as a proxy for God. And I can say, if enough people accept me and think that I'm worthy, why wouldn't God? What is all of this busy, remember, sloth is very busy, slothful people are very busy. What is all this busy activity performing for others indicate about what we really fear? I think it's this, that we're constantly afraid that we're not good enough. And so, as the Lutheran theologian Oswald Bayer would say, we're always at work trying to justify ourselves. And there's no way that we can adequately do that on an immanent level, right? The only way we can adequately do that is on a transcendent level, where God comes down to say, I'm here for you. I'm all in for you. I have given everything for you. And our identity emerges out of that truth, rather than the one that I aspire to get everyone else to agree with me on, right? That I'm always nervous is going to somehow fail. That I'm always kind of living in this imposter syndrome, right? When are they going to find out who I really am, right? When are they going to kick me out of the community? When are they going to vote me off the island? When are they going to ban me from communion? Right? And so this is exacerbated by our shame culture, and in a way it's killing all of us. This is a spiritual malady of our people that I think so many of us are struggling with silently. We don't know how to talk about it, and we're afraid to talk about it. Can you talk about it in the church? So let me return to Sherry Turkle, and then we'll try to get on, I think I've got next, some ideas about how to recover from this situation. So that's a fun little image. Turkle writes in a New York Times article from about 3 years ago, she says, a 15-year-old boy told me that someday he wanted to raise a family not the way his parents are raising him, with phones out during meals and in the park and during his school sports events, but the way his parents think they are raising him, with no phones at meals and plentiful family conversation. One college junior tried to capture what is wrong about life in his generation. He says, our texts are fine, he says. It's what texting does to our conversations when we're together that's the problem. So she argues we face a significant choice. It's not about giving up our phones or our technology or any of our devices, but about using them with greater intention. So I want you to hear that from me. While I've been rather critical at trying to name the problem, I don't think we should get rid of any of this. I think our challenge as church leaders is to figure out how do we live with it well, but with an awareness that, as significant formational capacity to take us away from the goods of the kingdom that Jesus wants to give us, that God wants to bless us with, that we were created for in terms of that embodied relationship, and then it can point us down a totally different track. Something that we think is more ultimate, the affirmation of other people, the avoidance of God's call in our life. And we busy ourselves with all of that, and as a consequence, space for the kingdom and its realities gets squeezed out. So one more video clip. This one's much more informational. Let's see what's next. And then we'll get on to a bit of recovery, because this is going to, for me, this clip is like a segue into the fact that what's being recommended by secular experts on how to deal with this problem sound suspiciously to me like ancient Christian practices. And that in a secular, non-Christian way, they're advocating the recovery of something we know how to do better. I gotta cut this again, get over to...
A simple thought. Monkeys that are known to have a developed social life organize in small groups